In this video I am going to show you what I have decided to nickname as a cloud sleeve. That was the description my student and myself came up with when we were trying to figure out the construction. So basically it is a tulle sleeve which is gathered, but then on the inside there's a separate shorter fitted piece of which would act as a lining, which is holding the whole gather in shape. It has also been French seamed, you can see that, and the actual bodice piece is French seamed also. So I am going to hopefully show you how to do all of that. So I have one seam left to do on the bodice, so I'm going to show you how to do a French seam. So normally when you're sewing up a garment you work with your right sides together, but with a French seam you are going to basically sew your seam twice. So you start off with your garment wrong sides together. So obviously with the tulle it's quite difficult to figure out which is which, and that's why I've got the piece of black fabric here, just to kind of try and help you actually see what I'm working on, because my tulle is ivory. It's quite hard to see against the colour of my machine. So as I say, work with initially your wrong sides together for the first half of your French seam, and you take off half your seam allowance. So I've allowed 1 centre seam allowance, so that means I sew off 0.5 for the first half of my French seam. Pop it into the machine. Make sure it's edge to edge. And as normal, start off with a little back tack and then sew off 0.5, which is half my seam allowance. Obviously if you had with the French seam you do want to end up with a very small seam, so ideally you wouldn't use any more than 1 centimetre to start off with. So that is the first half of my seam, and you now trim that back even more so that you're really only leaving about 3 millimeters or so behind. Sorry, that's not very neat. Get rid of that last little bit. So there you go, that's been trimmed back, and now you turn it right sides together and you sew the other half of your seam allowance off. So effectively what you're doing is you're enclosing the seam allowance from the first time you stitched it. Okay, little back tack, keeping it as neat as possible. No harm just to pull a teensy little bit at the back of the machine to keep a nice tension when you're sewing the tulle, just to stop it puckering on you. Obviously if you find it easier you can press all of this first to make sure that the whole thing comes out nice and flat. And trim your threads. So there you have it. So that's the right side of your French seam, and then turn it over, and that's the wrong side. So as you can see, everything is enclosed in your French seam. So when you're using a fabric that's transparent or see-through, it's a lovely clean way to finish off, because obviously overlocking or something like that could look quite messy on the inside. So I've all my seams on my bodice made up with French seams. So the next thing we need to do is make up the sleeve. So this is the lining part of my sleeve, which is just your usual shape. And then we have the gathered part of the sleeve. So the first thing we're going to do is sew along the hem part of the sleeve. So that's the straight bit. so not the sleeve head. Okay, and obviously the trickiest thing when working with tulle is to make sure you end up with a pair, so just make sure to watch out for that when you're sewing. So I'm going to pin my gathered, so with the larger section of the sleeve, I've already put a gathering line in on the hem, because I need to gather that now to match up with the lining section of my sleeve. So this is what creates the whole kind of cloud effect, as we called it. Okay, so you pin that along and try and make sure that your gathers are nice and even. You don't want a big clump of gathers in one place and then no gathers somewhere else. So make sure to kind of tease out your gathers as you go along and make sure that they're evenly dispersed along the end of the sleeve. Okay, and pin that along. I find when you are sewing gathers, certainly when it's a tulle one, it's easier to put the gathered piece of fabric on the bottom and have the flat piece of fabric on the top, because automatically the feeder will help actually gather in the fabric. So again, sew off your full seam allowance here, which is 1 centimetre in my case. Again, when working with tulle, you don't want big seam allowances because everything is going to show through. Nothing can be hidden. So you want to try and keep it all as clean as possible. Okay. So when you see that your gathers are not perfectly even, you can manipulate them as you go. Continue. So basically I'm sewing the two hems of the sleeve together, the lining section and the gathered section. I'm trying to keep it as clean and neat as possible, because as I say, with tulle absolutely everything can be seen. So you need to keep all your seam allowances neat, even, tidy. And obviously you can be even more fussy about how evenly the gathers are dispersed. What I would also recommend to help keep your work really neat is actually remove the gathering line, because then at least you'll have one less thing. But of course make sure to pull out the right thread. You don't want to end up pulling out the line that you've just stitched, so do be careful. And you may not actually get it out the whole way. It's kind of worth it if you can. Just kind of gently pull. A little bit high risk, but as I say, worth it if you can do it. Sometimes quitting while you're ahead. Oh, I think I've managed to get it all. Yeah, got it all out. It just makes it cleaner, because at least there's only one line of stitching left behind. So just, obviously because you can see the stitching, you need to make it as clean as possible. And then, like we did with the French seam, we're going to trim that. Trim it back to about 0.5. And then the next stage is actually to sew up the sleeve, to sew the underarm seam on the sleeve. That's the next thing we're going to do. So basically the sleeve is going to end up being fully made up before it actually gets put into the dress or the bodice. So fold your sleeve right sides together along the underarm seam. So that's my gathered section, right sides together. And sew off your full 1 centimetre. We're doing an open seam here, we're not doing a French seam, because it's basically going to be bagged out, so there's no need to do a French seam. Making sure the seams match along the gathering line. Obviously pin this together if you're more comfortable. I have a habit of not pinning things, and trim off your threads. Okay, so that is the underarm seam, and it has been sewn with your full seam length taken off. Next, turn the sleeve so that you have, it doesn't really matter which one is on the outside or the inside, but you're basically going to sew the sleeve together. Easier if the gathered section was on the outside, so sorry. Just to make that a little bit clearer, it'll actually sit better. So you can see there now, that's the puffy side. Then inside there I have my lining, which is this section, and you're going to match it at the underarm seam. Now I would recommend pressing that seam open first before you do this, but just for the purpose of the video I'm not going to. So open up those seams, ideally have them pre-pressed so that they sit flat, and put a pin in. And then match up your double notches underneath the arm. I find with tulle, if you actually put the pin in twice like that, it's less likely to slip out. So just to show you that if you actually kind of weave it in twice, it won't slip out as easily, because otherwise the pins can really fall out of the tulle and it's extremely frustrating. Okay, so as I say, pin, this is the underarm section that I'm pinning first, and I'm matching up my notches. And then match up, find your notch up at the sleeve, the top of the sleeve head, and do the same on your lining section, and put those two together. And then pull the gathered sleeve to fit with the lining section of the sleeve head, and pin those together. And again, ensuring that you keep the gathers as even as you can. You don't want all the gathers up at the top of the sleeve head, and similarly you don't want all the gathers down at the side of the arm. So make sure your gathers are nice and even. So you do just have to manipulate it and maneuver it so that you get a nice even placement of your gathers. And then do the other side of the sleeve, keeping it all nice and even. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew between our notches. So our single notch, our sleeve head, and our double notch. Because as with any sleeve, there's ease on the sleeve head lining. So we have to take into that into consideration before we sew it into the armhole. So basically from notch to notch, we're going to sew around. And in this case, we only want to sew off the same 1 centimetre. And no back tack, because you're going to want to be able to pull this line of stitching to incorporate the ease on the sleeve head. And again, trying to keep the gathering as even as possible and making sure there's no large tucks or anything like that. And just work your way around, taking the pins out as you go. Making sure that everything is sitting nice and flat, nothing is twisted. Just trying to keep your work as tidy as possible. And that is the whole way around to my notches. Okay, and you take it out. Okay, so we've got our stay row basically now on the top of that. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to set the sleeve into our armhole. Okay, so because we're going to do a French seam, you work with your wrong sides together first. So I like to turn it then so that my bodice is actually sitting that way. So that's my wrong side in there. And we want to do the same with our sleeve. So we're going to turn this through so that we have our wrong side. And our wrong side together. So you just have to be careful not to lose all your pins and everything when you're doing this. Okay? Just try and get it sitting as neat as possible. And then, like with any sleeve, I like to start off at the underarm